now. So kind of the wind in is a bit about these influences, isn't it? Right, the A, B, and C influences.
Yeah.
I wanted to start there because the lot of you kind of got together, right, and worked into A and B, primarily A and B influences.
Yeah.
Uh, and uh, there's a couple things that I just want to add to it. All right.
Mm.
I've got the paper open in front of me. The reason why this is important to understand A, B, and C, and D, and E influences, which weren't touched on very much, were they? Is because if you can't tell the difference between A and B influences, you can't grow your magnetic center. Or if you do grow a magnetic center, you'll probably grow one that is more aligned to what you call in your document fake B influences. Okay.
Mm. Mm.
Very important aspect of the work is to be able to constantly distinguish between what these things are. Yeah. And get a flavor and a sense for it because it grows that aspect of the magnetic center. Um, so there was only two things actually in this that stood out that I want to address. One is where it says that important to note that any one of these domains could, with the correct stance or value, become B influences. This is talking about A influences. I would challenge that this is never the case, actually. A B influence can become an A influence, but an A influence, because it lacks life, cannot evolve. Okay, it cannot evolve into a B
Okay.
influence. All right.
Yeah.
The way that it works is it kind of goes, if you think of the right side of the Enneagram, you have C, B, A. All right. We won't worry about D and E at this point in time, but a C influence presents itself on the planet as a B influence. And then, depending on what the human does with it, they can either migrate back up to the C and cross over to D and E, or it becomes an A. All right. But an A does not go B and then C. Because in order for it to do it, it would have to have a
Mm.
corporeal body. It would have to be an entitized form in order to actually evolve. It's one of the rules on the planet that you have to be in physical form in order to evolve. Right.
Right.
Okay.
Mm.
Think on it. Don't trust it. Just think on it and
Yeah.
use
No,
what you
makes
know
sense.
about the laws, and you can work it out. I think pretty well. The
So,
other aspect, yeah. Right. Go
so
ahead.
sorry, Peter, are you saying that these distinct influences are independent from mankind, independent from human beings? As you say, they are entities of themselves.
Yeah.
They
It's not quite that simple. That's sort of like if a tree falls in the forest with no one to hear it, will it make a sound? Influences have to have something that they influence. So in that standpoint, they are not outside of humanity. Okay, but they don't come from humanity. None of them do. Um, I'll say it this way: A influences are a result of a manifestation of the interaction of the law of three, and the law of seven here at planetary level that is known as, well, basically chaos, disorder, or the law of accident is a term that's used sometimes in this work. Okay. It's a real law, but it has to have an impact on something. Now, you take someone, for example, that becomes wealthy in this life, and they sit there and they think that they had anything to do with it whatsoever. In most cases, it just happens to be that they were in that sphere where certain A influences were all pointing in a particular direction. But somewhere else in that sphere, they're pointing elsewhere, right? This also is the key or the secret to why I say don't change things. Because when a person sees something about themselves that they no longer wish to look at and they immediately try and change it, they reshuffle all those things, right? I'll give you an example. I'll give you a very physical example. Um, Someone who's drinking too much alcohol. Yeah. They could suddenly decide, I'm drinking too much alcohol. I need to stop this immediately. And they cease drinking. And then they end up getting, clogged arteries and keeling over a couple months later. You see, I'm not suggesting drink alcohol to keep your arteries clear, but everything has a counterbalance within it. All right. That's what I'm trying to get at. Not saying, prolong your life and drink more. You understand though? That's it's mucking with A influences that's discouraged. Instead, what we do is we go and collect B influences. All right, and I'll get into what this does in the complex or what this does in the whole series of things in a bit. But yeah, A influences, B influences, C influences are just that. They're influences. Yeah, but they don't come from humans.
Okay, thank you.
Now, you say something else in the first part under A influences, a couple things. A influences cause dispersion, losing essence of self, and are tiring. It's not necessarily the case, right? An A influence, well, first of all, let's go to the second part where you said astral light levels 6 and 7. That's not the case. That's called wrong manufacture, all right? And that is an influence that is not A, B, or C. All right, the human is meant to deal roughly in level 4. They dip down into level 5. I'm talking about a human in its natural condition. They dip down to level 5 and they rise up to 3 and 2 and 1, and so on and so forth. But the center of gravity for the human is at level 4. So A influences would be actually a 4 or a 5. And the reason why I say this is because they keep things moving, right? They're the star ruby in the ecology of the planet. That expansion, right? That change. You see, so it's not level 6 and 7, nor is it necessarily an aspect of the moving center, because a person can be very much A influenced in their life, completely with their mentality, or completely with their emotions, or thereabouts. Yeah. So what's a C influence and how does it show up? Well, first of all, do we know what B influences are? I say go collect B influences, right?
Well, we identify things like astrology.
Hmm?
You speak in terms of domains here.
Hmm.
Um, Art, literature, science, things that require some learning, things that require some appreciating,
Mhm.
maybe some higher emotion connection somewhere there. Um, Things that uplift and trigger a slightly high level of dealing in
I'll give
people.
you a word. I'll give you a word for it. It's called inspiration.
Inspiration.
Anything that can inspire you is most likely a B influence.
Okay.
Okay, now person, or you can say it as getting lit up, right? Something lights you up. Now, this is the idea because you mentioned a few things. This is what I mean by a B influence becoming an A influence, because you can go to astrology sites and they're very much like you were born on this day, one size fits all, here's your horoscope for the day, right? And they don't take into consideration things like where you were born, the time of birth that you were born in a lot of cases. And so that's more of just like, instead of inspiration, it's titillation. Do you know the word titillation?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It tickles, it fancies a person's, usually it fancies a person's ego or tickles a person's ego, um, or their fear, right? Either way is titillation sometimes. It's, you scare a person. Oh my God, my chart says this today, you know, stay indoors, don't go out, lock close the blinds and hang out and that sort of thing. It's another form of titillation. It's just dealing with the negative side instead of the positive side. That's an example of a B influence becoming an A influence. Now, what's the C behind that B? Let's get into the C influence now. What is that?
Is it that these classical mystical subjects have at their core natural laws?
Hmm.
So, for example, with astrology, you've got positive and negative birth signs. You've got the law of three within astrology, cardinal, fixed, and mutable. So it's I guess what is powering these things from the unseen worlds to make them, and if you could get to that, you would break through the cultural understanding into more of an esoteric understanding.
Kind of.
Okay,
A C influence actually always sits with a person.
right.
Okay. Um, the D and E is creational, like what you're talking about.
Okay.
But a C influence is the person around which it gathers. Okay. Now, do you know the story of Leo selling the eggs?
No, I think I missed that one.
Very symbolic story. Okay, first of all, you need to understand that an egg is a symbol for something else. An egg is a symbol for something held in custodianship, something held in that could become alive or could become dead. Okay, so this is an analogy, but as the story goes, Leo was selling eggs door to door, right? And he knocked on a particular door, and an old man opened the door and said, I used to be like you, right? And he was talking about what he said, I used to be like you, but I lost it. He was talking about he used to be a C man, okay, a C person. And then he lost it because the egg didn't mature. You see the analogy with the eggs in there. Um, yeah, did you know the story, Mark? You come across it before?
It
Heard it?
rings a bell. I haven't heard it for such a long, long time.
Yeah.
That,
But that's the idea, okay? Is
yeah.
that a a person is the custodian of a C influence. Sometimes a trio is a custodian of a C influence. You can take something like, Gurdjieff, I assume, had it, right? In his
Yeah.
endeavor. This is why it's so appealing. I think Leo had it. I think the trio had it. I think JC had it. I think Buddha had it. Yeah, it's the C influence is the person, and I will tell you that the planet has never been, since Sumeria, has never been without a time, without a person that holds the even signal. Okay, that's where it originated. That's where it's continued through. Egypt had it, or at least the pharaoh was supposed to have had it at the time, the king. Yeah. So it jumps from person to person. That is a C influence. Now, here's the danger in this. Um, what you call fake B influences, there are a lot of people out there that are chocked full of various A influences that are all pointing in one particular direction that look like B influences. Yeah. The problem is, and they then appear to be a C person. You see, the center around which things gather. The problem is they don't have the D and E. The D and E are creation. The D and E are the esoteric, where the signal originates from in creation. If they don't have that connection, then that's that's the fake C, if you will, chock full of supposed B influences that are really A influences, um, all point in the same direction. Yeah, it's a false magnetic center. Would be another way to express that.
Okay. So could a very potent saying be a C influence, Pierce? I'm
Say that
thinking
again.
of could a very potent saying. Is this why sayings are so important? Uh,
Say
it- sayings. Can I give you an example?
Mhm.
In Beelzebub,
Mhm.
Gurdjieff mentions three distinct transformative episodes. One was by his grandmother's bedside on her deathbed.
Mhm.
The second was when somebody knocks his tooth out, and I won't go into details on those. The third one was when he came across a very potent saying of a Russian tale of and what it boiled down to was that if you're going on a spree,
Whole hog. Yeah.
do it go the whole hog and pay the postage.
Yeah.
And that was his third formatory potent gathering
Yeah.
that stayed with him for the rest of his life. Would that be C?
No, because it depends on who's saying it.
Right.
Okay. Again, we talk about attendances. Someone has an attendance, right? Whatever attends them determines whether they are a C person or not. It's not even personal. It has to do, well, first of all, let me back up and clarify something about Gurdjieff in that regard. All right. You need to understand the symbology of what a grandmother is, what a cocaine lozenge is, what a tooth is, yes, and what is meant in the context of the whole hog. Yeah. Once you understand those, you have a chance of becoming a C person, you see, because it depends on who says it. But it's not personal. Yeah. It bounces from individual to individual depending on whether they are aligned to be able to contain it, or actually not even contain it, but to work it, grow it, transmit it. God help us, literally, God help us if someone like that ceases to show up someday. Really. Yeah. Then the reset button, as you, I think, mentioned in your email. Yeah. No more opportunity. Probably the birds will take over, given the evidence.
So is a C influence then a B influence that has germinated and flowered?
No, it is a D and E influence that found a conduit.
Okay.
Okay.
Right.
D and E are creational influences that
Yes.
find a conduit to be able to generate more B into the world.
Got it. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Now, B has a very crystallizing aspect to it as well, because you can go into a cathedral or some holy place and collect and pick up all kinds of B influences without a C there. The reason being is because at one point in time there was a C there. Yeah, depends on your configuration at that point. This is what's meant by go collect B influences. Be inspired. Make sure that you have room every day in your life for being inspired by something. That's going to formulate that magnetic center better. Okay, so does this offer a little bit more clarity on what A, B, and C influences are?
Yes, I just say it from my point. I think so. I think maybe we're trying to fit it too much into the centers, the astral light grid, maybe, and maybe this is coming from a slightly different angle or perspective. That's what I want to say.
I mean, 6 and 7 of the astral light, all they can do is deteriorate you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a person totally swamped in A influences, there's nothing evil about it, right? There's nothing even degenerative about it. It's just, I'll tell you this, everyone, without exception, every person on this planet encounters a point in time where they're tested with B influences. Okay, it doesn't matter who they are. Every human being is tested with B influences. If a person has a resonance for B influences or has the flavor of it, a couple things can happen. Some people don't have the flavor of it and just never collect any B influences, really. But a person that does have some resonance for B influences will be tested further, and they will be exposed to A influences that look like B influences and actual B influences. And if they're able to tell the difference between the two, then they begin to develop what's called in this work a magnetic center. Okay, that actually changes their being. If they are not able to discern the difference between the similar A influences and the B, they become largely materialistic from the standpoint that they go, religion is a bunch of bullshit, right? Spirituality is a bunch of bullshit. None of it matters. None of it works. It's an illusion, yeah, this sort of thing. And you see people like that end up, they had a connection to B for a bit, and they weren't able to cause that separation in themselves to know what's what. But every human being encounters that.
These are your debunkers, deniers, people like
Sure. Yeah. Not all the way, yeah, because there are some people with a magnetic center that are really good at debunking things that should be debunked.
that. Yeah, quite.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go to the board for a minute because we are going to explore magnetic center a bit more, and I want to dispel an illusion. And as a prior math teacher, I might need your help a bit in some of the definitions. Okay. Yeah. If you're okay with that. All right. Settle down, Karen.
Yeah.
Good. Is it got me in the board?
Yeah.
Yes.
This is what most people think they are. You've got thinking, emotional, and moving. All right, as a triangle. You see this okay?
Yeah.
Okay. But in reality, some people look like this. Some people look like this. Some look like that, all confused. You see, the triangles aren't balanced. Some people look like, let's see, like that. All right. You understand what I'm saying is that there's no balance. There's no balance in there. This is where you get man number 1, 2, and 3, which is the thinking, the emotional, moving, or the order. The specific order is moving, emotional, and thinking. Okay. Doesn't really matter because they're all equal. But lopsided, unbalanced triangles. That's how people start off in life. And part of the idea behind development is to balance out that triangle. Now, we've talked about the idea of establishing a magnetic center. Actually, let me pause on that for a second. I want to bring up that this imbalance is what causes morality. Now, the antithesis to morality is consciousness. Okay, consciousness is something altogether different. Morality is just one person's brand of crazy, right? One person's brand of imbalance. You may have a different morality than I do because your triangle looks different, right? Or different than the fellow sitting next to you because your triangle looks different. Cultures, the Roman Empire had a morality. I would hazard to say it wasn't an equilateral triangle, right? Certain generations have a morality that is represented by an unbalanced, what do they call it? The like, I don't know, isosceles, equilateral, yeah.
Scaling.
Huh?
The
Scalar?
third one is scaling.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. It's been a while. I should know this, right? But in any event, it's okay not to have the words right now as long as you get the concept of it, that the human is meant to be an equilateral triangle. And no human is born an equilateral triangle. We're all born some kind of weird lopsided version of that. And the idea, going back to this idea of a magnetic center forming in you, is where you get the symbol. Sorry, this thing really quickly follows me. I try to get up slowly. Once you form a magnetic center inside of you, then it can then begin to contact each of these centers. You get this symbol, right? This package symbol is what it's called sometimes. Originally, you've got these 3 connections between the thinking, emotional, and moving center. And they, as I said, show up like this. So you get like T, E, M like this. And anytime one of them shifts, all three have to kind of rearrange themselves to be able to accommodate. Never turning out as equilateral like the proper one there, but constantly shifting. And this is why I call it morality, because it isn't based in the actuality of a person. It's based in the arrangement of how the thinking, emotional, and moving centers relate to one another in certain things, right? What then happens is these connections, once the magnetic center is formed within a person, it begins to push and balance out. Okay, it pushes the thinking center this way or the moving center this way. It begins to equalize things in a person so that they become functioning the way that they were intended to, so that they begin to work the way that they were intended to. All right. And once it does that, it can then sever these connections, and this becomes your core. All right. You become more of a symbol like that rather than a triangle. Yeah. This is very symbolic language. Is it making sense a little bit?
Yeah.
Pause for questions. It's an important concept to get about why the magnetic center is so important. Do you also see that it has to do with you will automatically grow in a certain context, I should say. If you put in the work, growth happens automatically. You're no longer the engineer. You're no longer saying, you know, my thinking center is wacky in this department, or my moving center is out of balance. You have a magnetic center, it will begin to push these things into proper alignment. This is why it's so important to be able to separate those A and B influences.
Okay.
Because if you, the hardest thing in the world is to get that magnetic center. Once you have that, it begins to move things in the right direction. Now, it doesn't happen instantaneously. In fact, it's a great deal of suffering is actually involved in it, and relapses, and it's hard. It's hard on a person. Yeah, this kind of work can be very challenging. Can take years and can be uncomfortable.
So there must be some practical steps then, Piers, to go about doing this.
Yeah, I just gave it.
Right.
Be inspired every day.
Right. Okay. I was just going to reiterate that. Okay. Yeah. Be inspired. Okay.
Yeah.
Or
You
to
know,
find things that are inspiring.
talking about this whole idea of the sarmong, I did come across a really neat analogy, even if it is completely just not relevant to what sarmong means. On Wikipedia, it talks about the bees, yeah, and the idea behind the bees, and this ties into a Zoroastrian context, but the idea behind the bees is going around to the flowers and collecting the sweet essence, yeah, and bringing it back and transforming it. So from that standpoint, I wholly agree that that is one of the vital essential properties of a work like this is to go collect those essences. Yeah. You find something that you think belongs in the future of humanity, by all means, collect it, preserve it in yourself, work with it in yourself.
Yeah.
But yeah. See, I've given a lot of practical exercises, and I know that sometimes they'll resonate with some of you, and sometimes they will not resonate with some of you. Right? And I try and give a whole spattering of those, um, because I don't want you to feel like it's drudgery. This
Right.
personal development journey, although challenging, should not feel like drudgery. You should have that light in it.
Can I offer an even parallel here, Piers?
Yeah, sure.
It's been on my mind a lot. This has, in relation to, because I've been taking a huge interest in Gurdjieff and the fourth way, and a lot of it is very inspiring. And the two key things that come out of it so far, one is self-remembering, and the other one is the magnetic center, like talking about now. Now, I'm thinking Liam must have had a parallel to this because he doesn't use those phrases at all. Is what in your view is Leo's parallel the art of detection? Is that where Leo comes in with this?
Well, he does call it the nourishing art of detection would be the
Yes.
full, the full term of it. So,
Yes.
yeah, I would suppose so, because it teaches you to use yourself and your equipment in a particular way to get that inspiration, right? To get to those B influences. Sure.
Okay. So he suggests things like detect faces.
And by the way, Leo does talk about it in the magnet lesson.
Right.
Aligning oneself, you'll have to look it up. If you can't find it, I'll find it. But the idea of the coil, right, around, and it aligns all of the electrons in a certain way, that is the process of collecting B influences, aligning oneself.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that.
Now, sometimes you have a case where this is especially true if a person's triangle is missing a leg. In other words, between the thinking and the emotional. Okay, that leads to sociopathy and psychopathy, sociopaths and psychopaths, because that connection is severed. They no longer have the balancing effect of those, and so their morality becomes amoral. and no matter what your triangle looks like, if you encounter one that has a sever in their thinking and emotional centers, then you're going to detect that they don't have morality. Whereas if a person has a magnetic center and it's then able to connect and become the stabilizing factor for the three centers that it's attached to, and the outside of the triangle then dissipates and fades away, it's not amorality or immorality, it's consciousness. There's a huge difference, right? In some respects, the process is similar, right? Of severing the connection between the thinking and emotional center, and the emotional and moving center, and the moving and thinking center, severing those connections, but replacing it with something else, replacing it with a kernel in the middle. Do you understand? It gets very symbolic. I mean, now we're talking in the realms of the higher emotional center itself. Yeah, it speaks in pictures, doesn't it? It speaks in symbols. Let's talk a bit about the sexual center, okay? Because I've said many times and in many different lessons that the sexual center really doesn't exist in most people. Yeah. What it does is it's there to be used and abused. And the thinking center, the moving center, and the emotional center are constantly using and abusing the sexual center. It doesn't function the way that it's supposed to. It just gives energy, gets robbed, beaten up constantly. And invariably what it becomes in a person's life is what's called illusion. Instead of reality, it's illusion, right? And so all of the things that you think are real, that are actually illusory, even about yourself, all of that comes from a misuse of the sexual center. And people have illusion in their emotions, people have illusion in their thinking, and people have illusion in their habitual life, in their moving center, and even sometimes in their bodies. Yeah? There's a term, isn't there? Body dysmorphia, where they don't see themselves as they actually look. So you understand what I mean? That yes, the human complex has a sexual center, but the way that it operates, you might as well leave it out of the diagram for most people, because it doesn't function, doesn't do what it's supposed to. Now, once you establish in yourself this magnetic center, and the other centers begin to balance out, it stops robbing energy from the sexual center. And the first manifestation of that is that you stop you stop perceiving life in such an illusory way. You lose your illusions. You become disillusioned, if you will, but not in a negative way, right? Well, isn't it curious that we have that term? And we treat like, oh, that person's disillusioned. Wonderful, right? Should we be so lucky? No. But the illusions start to fall away. And I guess this is where some of the friction of the work comes in, because it's painful to lose our illusions. But you can't call yourself a seeker of truth as long as you're caught up in your illusions, can you? They don't mesh. How can you be on the pursuit of truth if you hold fast to your illusions? And we've talked about this in lessons before. By the way, this is a wrap up. I'm going to say this. This is a wrap up of the last 6 lessons we've had together, because we're talking about, things that are to do with the human. Next week we move on to cosmology. Okay, so I'm trying to keep this fairly open and to clear up any kinds of misunderstandings about what the human's composed of. Now, once the thinking, emotional, and moving centers balance themselves out, then the sexual center has the potential to manifest in the way that it was supposed to, because now it's not being robbed of energy constantly. And like I said, the instinctive center is really part of the moving center. And the sexual center is actually kind of a bridge between the higher thinking and emotional centers and the lower centers. Yeah. What happens then, we're talking about like going from man number 4 to 5 to 6 and to 7. But what happens then is that once the sexual center starts functioning the way that it should, and the other lower centers are functioning the way they are, then the magnetic center does something quite amazing for you. It absorbs the lower half of the emotional center. You're going to have to come back to this video. There's been a lot of heavy things in it. The magnetic center absorbs the lower half of the emotional center, which then allows it to become, allows it to form a connection to the higher emotional center. This is why you lose these types of connections and gain an actual center, or something real, that kernel, that I that we've been discussing so much. But man number 1, 2, and 3 is a slave to the sexual center. They're just driven by it. Or it's a slave to them. I suppose you could look at it both ways.
Just because the thinking center loves sexual energy.
Oh yeah, it's a drug.
It's a drug, yeah.
It's an absolute drug for it. It's high octane. Yeah. In this work, there's kind of a warning against daydreaming. Do you know the difference between daydreaming and using your imagination creatively? One can happen, the other can't, or is highly unlikely. I'll give you an example. Okay. We've all done this. You're driving in your car and somebody cuts you off. And your immediate reaction, is anger or whatever the case might be. But then for the next 30 minutes afterwards, you have this imaginary conversation in your head of what you would tell that person, right? Or it doesn't have to be in the car, right? You get in an argument with somebody, you have a brief encounter, and then you spend the next 3 hours thinking, oh, I should have told him this, and I should have said that. And this is sexual energy in the emotional center and being translated by the thinking center. Okay, it's an illusion, because the fact is you didn't say those things. You can't go back and say those things. It's not possible. It's a complete waste of energy. Another example, you laying on the beach daydreaming about what you would do with all the money if you won the lottery, and yet you don't even go buy a lottery ticket. You see the insanity of that?
Mm.
Yeah, it's illusory, because if you don't even make the effort to go buy a lottery ticket, and you're, you know, imagining the yachts and the, the charity work that you're going to do, and the, how wonderful your life is going to be, and so on and so forth, that's daydreaming. That's sexual energy in your thinking center. Sexual energy in the moving center often turns out to be really ridiculous feats of, superhuman things, right? Like,
Marathons.
yeah, marathons, climbing Mount Everest, just only to get to the top. And not even, maybe you'll look around once you're up at the top, but like the difference would be if there's a particular flower that you've never seen, right? The blue rose of forgetfulness, and it's at the top of Mount Everest. Yeah. And you decide to make an intentional journey to go see that flower, contemplate that flower, right? That is a proper use of the moving center. Whereas just to say you've been there, right, to be able to give the impression to others of your superiority, perhaps, or your physical acumen, or how willful you are to be able to, foster this impression upon other people. It's all just sexual energy in the moving center. So one of the most abused statements that's ever come about in the Emin was, it's not what you do, it's why you do it. All right. That has been used to beat more people up than any other statement in there. It doesn't mean what you think it means, probably. What it actually means is, where is it coming from in relation to the centers, right? What you do, climb Mount Everest, why you do it, to find the blue rose of forgetfulness, or in search of the green emerald, right? You dance until you find the green emerald. That's the true meaning of that statement. It has nothing to do with behaving badly and then justifying it later.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right?
Makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, are you saying, Pierce, that the sexual center doesn't require any specific work on it as such? The work involves.
It just needs to stop being drained.
Yes. Okay. So
Yeah.
this
Now,
is why,
later on, yes, later on, night there is specific work that you can do with the sexual center.
Yes.
It does need to be sublimated in a very alchemical way. Okay, but that does not mean used in all the strange ways that have come about in certain practices. Like, yeah.
I found an anagram.
Huh? What now? Oh, nature excels. Look at that. Oh,
Yeah.
cool.
I had to get that anagram.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You got it
Yes.
right.
Later on, there is specific work to do with the sexual center, but it's more of how to use it the way that it was designed, not how to fix it. Trust me, it's okay if it stops being beaten up and robbed. It'll be okay. Yeah. It's very quick at regenerating itself and having that kind of vitality that it was meant to. It's just like, every 3 seconds, one center is coming along and nicking its force before it gets a chance to do anything with it.
Can I ask a question here that's been on my mind about this?
Sure.
Some of us are no spring chickens anymore. Is it still there?
Say again, what?
Some of us are no spring chickens anymore.
All right. Procreation, my friend, has everything to do with the instinctive center, nothing to do with the sexual center.
Okay.
The instinctive center does actually rightfully take a bit of energy from the sexual center during the procreative and sexual act. All right. It's allowed to do that. Partly because the instinctive center then gives something back later. Okay. But sex and sexual center, it's probably the wrong word for it entirely. Maybe we need to rethink how it's stated. Procreation is an instinctive act. The sexual center, at the higher end, when it's functioning properly. The sexual center can marry and merge essences. That's its job. All right. Now, let me put it kind of an interesting way. Today we have this phenomenon called mixed martial arts, where you get some, some guy that's built like a truck, and he studies karate for 6 months, judo for another 6 months, Thai kickboxing for 7 months, and gets a black belt in all 6 or 7 different martial arts, and then gets in the ring, and he's got his own style, right? That's not mixing and marrying essences. That is a mechanical mixture of something. To give you an example of what mixing and marrying essences are, take something like drunken monkey kung fu. Okay, now there was a man, I don't remember who, but there was a man who was imprisoned, probably for drinking. But he had already studied a style of kung fu called drunken style, right? It's a very loose, relaxed, almost comical in certain respects style of kung fu. And while he was in his prison cell, he watched monkeys outside eating apples that were decaying and rotting and had alcohol content in them. And he watched how they would fight and play and tumble and roll around in their somewhat drunken state, but also using the monkey style of how monkeys fight, right? He was able to take these two essences and marry them into something known as drunken monkey, which is very different than monkey style kung fu and very different than drunken style kung fu. It's emerging, but they actually work together. It's not a mechanical mixture. It's something new that's different from both of them, and yet has some of the genetic qualities of each. That's the idea behind the sexual center. Perhaps another example would be unification of essences. Can you take something like the essence of Islam and unify it with the essence of Judaism and the essence of Christianity? Can you come up with something that would not then fight and tear itself apart? You see, you won't be able to do that by doing a mechanical mixture, can you? Because you would get conflicting doctrines. You'd be at war with yourself. It would have to be something that emerges from those three. So do understand that about the sexual center. It doesn't have to be two, right? It's a bad term. I think it's not a good term. Sexual center. I don't think it's the right term. We'll have to think of something better. And what else? Let's get clarity on these topics that we've been discussing for 7 weeks. Humility. Before we started recording, we that word popped in, and in reference to becoming disillusioned, your greatest ally in that is humility. It's the humility to be able to look at yourself and to look at the situation, look at life as it is, your life, not life in general, but your life as it is, and understand that you need more, right? You get to a point in your own evolution where you can't just rely on yourself. You have to ask for help. The universe will help you. God will help you, however you want to say it. All right. But you have to actually have that open, humble heart to be able to say, help me understand this. Help me get there. Yeah. That's one problem. I think that it's one thing that had been missing from Fourth Way and Eamon, is that it was always thought that you could just do the whole thing by yourself, and you can't. Right? Yeah. Humility also comes in from the standpoint of getting to that place where the personality acquiesces to letting the essence actually run the show. Because the personality is just naturally not humble, is it? It's a false king. It thinks it can run the whole gambit of your life and everything in it, but if you look at the evidence, it's really not true. The personality has to humble itself enough to say, okay, maybe there's more to life than me running the show. Maybe I can step aside and let my essence actually take over.
Yeah.
That's a hard place to get to, isn't it?
Piers, one of
Yeah.
the things that I've got going on with is holding back on asking questions. This is like, as in, what's been going on in me during this meeting, from the point of view of, I'll give you an example where you took the triangle away from the 3 lines with the magnetic center. There's what turned up in me was, well, why are the lines coming off? Is it to do with stopping communication between the centers directly, so it has to go through the magnetic center? And then what I found was going on in me is, don't ask the question, work on it, see what you come to, as in me, right? Then ask the question, because there's too much of what I see that goes on is trying to have the easy way out of asking too many questions and not putting enough work in. And at the other end of it is putting too much work in without having got enough grounding, because I didn't ask enough questions in the first place.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a balance.
So this is what I've been spotting going on in me throughout the whole of today, because there's loads and loads and loads of things that I could have asked, and there's a part of me saying, no, do a bit of work yourself, right?
Okay.
And then, as like I said, there's that caution of, hang on, but am I going to do work in the wrong way because I didn't ask enough?
In this context, ask. Okay. Because trust me when I say that I won't give you too much to solve all the riddles for you.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's important to get clarity on things.
Right.
Okay. Otherwise, yeah, you will be going down the wrong path. In other words, what I'm saying to you is that I promise not to be your sexual center. You can't steal from me, right? It's an outflow, but you won't steal, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay.
Funny
So what I'll say, what I'll do now is to say, what is the purpose of why the outer triangle drops away?
No longer needed. Each center is able to work independently in service to a higher purpose instead of being influenced by the other centers. You see, with the triangle in text like that, what happens if one shifts is that they all have to kind of, conform and accommodate to it. If you get too much force in the thinking center, you're pulling it away from another center, and so on and so forth. It's really okay. Let's put it in these terms. Man number 1, 2, and 3 are all the wonky triangles, right? Not the equilateral. Man number 1, 2, and 3 just depends on which kind of wonky triangle you are. Which sort of crazy looking triangle are you? Man number 4 looks like the package symbol, okay, where it's got the triangle equilateral with the magnetic center in the middle supporting each of them. All right. It begins to then power their proper performance, or their proper performance in the scale of how it's designed or against design. Once that is established, man number 5 loses the outer edge, okay, and becomes a different kind of thing altogether. And if you go back through the archives and you see some of the descriptions that go along with man number 4, 5, 6, and 7, you'll see how this is the case, because no longer, if something happens to the thinking center, it cannot influence the moving center unless the magnetic center agrees with it.
Okay.
Mhm.
So that causes me to think, is there a relationship between the magnetic center and the mentality? Because with the
What do you mean by mentality?
right, what I mean is coming from my Eminent understanding, it's to do with making decisions about what I will and will not do. And that's not the will and actually it is part of the will and whatever areas. But what it then does is it hands it over to an automatic process that mentality will stop a person doing certain things or allows a person to do certain things depending on if it's an open gate or a closed gate.
You're talking about the difference between morality and consciousness. Okay. You're talking about the difference between morality and consciousness.
No, I wasn't quite coming from there. What I was trying to, actually, I don't know, am I? I'll give you an example. Yeah. We don't here at home want to wear shoes indoors. Yeah. For various reasons, cultural, cleanliness, whole lot, right? And what I found for years and years and years, it became an automatic thing that even if I had my shoes on and it was like, oh, I've forgotten something in the bedroom. Yeah. Shoes had come off. Yeah. Problem came was that we were in a mad rush. On top of an irritation that had been caused. So that was causing an imbalance, which caused oh, sod it, go and get the thing out of the room. We haven't got time to take shoes off, yeah, because we was up against time. From that point onwards, that gate in what Leo refers to as the mentality, right, was opened. So after all those years of both from a principle and from an automatic that stopped shoes being worn outside of the hallway, now it has to be a much more conscious decision not to do it, because having done it once, there's not that blockage, that gate there that causes
So let me go back to what I said. You're talking about the difference between morality and consciousness.
In what way?
Here's the way. A conscious act of the shoe example would be each and every time you make a conscious decision of whether you're going to leave them on or take them off. There's no automaticness about it whatsoever. That's consciousness. Morality has things like guilt attached to it, right? You slipped up once, and now you have to kind of make up for it by trying to imitate being more conscious, when it should always have been that conscious. Every time you enter that space, you should ask yourself, do I leave my shoes on or do I take them off? And then you go against a criteria in yourself of what the reasons are for doing one or the other. Now, in the case that you mentioned, you said that you were in a hurry. I'll tell you, if I'm late for somewhere, we do the same thing here. We take our shoes off. But if I'm late for somewhere and it's important that I'm not late, I'll leave my shoes on. It's a conscious choice. It's a very fine difference. The outcome can look
It's that
similar.
fineness.
Yeah, the outcome can always look similar, but one is conscious, the other is moralistic.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Don't make rules. Have
Okay.
consciousness instead.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. No rules. Consciousness. Maybe that's the rule. Be conscious. Yeah. But that's the outer edges disappearing. Yeah, because I'm sure there are all kinds of internal repercussions that you had to deal with of like, why the hell did I walk through the house with the shoes on when I know better? And, now I'm going to have to make up for it. And, all these sorts of things that should not play a part whatsoever.
It wasn't quite that.
Okay, good.
What it was that the next time that I needed to charge upstairs, there was not that, I don't know if resistance is the correct word, but that urge, that's a good one, an urge not to do it. It was like having done it once, having, if you like, broken the rule once, it was then easier to break it a second time. And it's not so much to do with the shoes. I'm just thinking about this more for a whole wider range of stuff.
Understand.
Which also gets into the whole dynamics of why things are breaking down, why holding patterns are breaking down, why as soon as somebody does something in some kind of way work, they either give permission to allow something for good or for bad. Yeah. And this is what I'm coming from. It's the shoe thing isn't a big thing.
I got that.
It's the awareness of the dynamics at play, that once permission is given to override something that's previously been there, which can be for good, but if it's I don't know if lowering of standards is the correct word, or household rules, but what I'm trying to get at is that once somebody's done something once, the permission is given for it to happen again, individually, within a family, within the Eminent, because I could see this over the years that I was there, that once somebody had done something, either oppressive or generative or connective, it gave other people the ability to then do it themselves, and they did it.
But again, this is not consciousness that you're speaking of.
Right.
It is not consciousness. That is breathing in the astral light of it and acting on it,
Yeah.
Oh,
and
it
it's
is.
how to control it. No, control's wrong. How to choose what to respond to and allow in and what not to.
Well, it's a constant effort, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
and
I did say guard your magnetic centers, not magnetic center in, I think last week, I believe it was, right? Guard that.
Yeah.
I think I did. If I didn't, then I should
have.
Yeah. That's kind of what's meant by that. But again, it just makes no sense. At a certain point in your development, it's not going to make any sense to have rules. You need to take everything that comes at you in a conscious way and decide on the spot. Now, this is where will have and won't have areas will help you, but they are precursors to consciousness. They are not consciousness. Will have and won't have areas create assemblies inside of you, right?
Yep.
I will have this, I won't have that. These are, they create certain structures inside of you. Yeah, they build your character in a certain way in your blood. You can't anticipate everything life is going to throw at you, but if you have will have and won't have areas that are actually part of your assembly, then whatever comes to you, and it becomes part of your magnetic center. You see, whatever comes to you from the thinking center has to go through the gatekeeper, and it decides whether it's going to influence things or not, right? As opposed to this configuration where something throws you off mentally and, you know, you have a belly ache and you're angry. You see?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
This is
And
where
I can
consciousness
see
comes.
now why that has, I was going to say has to, but that's wrong. Why, when that breaks down,
Mhm.
and it then has to go through that gatekeeper.
Yeah, it's unity. It's the first
So
first look
it
of
doesn't have
unity.
contact. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because literally, what business does the thinking center have talking to the moving or emotional center anyway? They can't even
That's what
speak the same language.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a Russian talking to a Chinese who's, you know, talking to an American. They can't understand each other, you know, and the Russian pushes the Chinese guy. And I mean, that's what happens in our complex. You know, that's what's going on all day long is just this war of misunderstandings. The magnetic center can understand all three and cause issuance into what is required at the time, not based on rules, but based on assessments and standards that have been put in place prior to developing consciousness.
Yeah. So I've got all kinds of things that that I'm trying to think of at the same time while trying to listen to you. And I'm saying to that a lot, no, not now. Listen to Piers now, and we'll talk about those things a bit later. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
my time is yours right now, or all of yours. Yeah. All right, Knight has something.
Yeah, thank you. On dealing with daydreams, if that's the way to put it, and I can see this is a big one. You know, I'm really, you know, focused on having a go at this. I can see two approaches. One's going to have to be self-discipline and self-awareness, but on the other one, I'm thinking is to give the thinking center better food. So maybe a combined approach of denial on the one hand, awareness, you know, and the other one, doing detection, be inspired, introduce new foods, introduce new interests.
It might help. You're going to have a certain degree of consciousness to be able to do that, which would indicate that you're already close to being able to do it. The general advice would be do not. Absolutely stop. Do not. Anytime you catch yourself daydreaming, please understand the difference. Daydreaming is a visualization or an acting out of something in your head,
yes,
or in any part of you, really, that can't actually happen based on the circumstances in your real life. That's what it is. It's a warning sign that you're misusing a fuel. If you can catch it happening, you're already close to being able to stop it. So if you can catch it happening, just be a father figure to it and say, do not in this life, not in this life. Okay. Have that. As far as giving your brain other things to do, the problem is that it's a very childish thing, the brain. It wants what it wants when it wants it, whether you like it or not. You think you might be in control of it, but the truth is, you're probably not you specifically, but you know, we're not really in control of it. It sits up here, or around here, I should say, and uses our legs and arms and everything else to go give it experiences. What did Leo say about boredom? If your brain gives you boredom, give it boredom back to teach it not to do that in the future. Yeah.
Ah, right.
Mhm. So there's many aspects to this. One has to do with disciplining things like your brain life. But how are you going to do that if you don't have a you that's in that father figure role? You understand what I mean? You can all be father figures, including the ladies, in that aspect of yourself. All right. But you have to exist before that's even a possibility. And if your magnetic center hasn't formed up and doesn't have that control, or your eye, right? We've talked about it in many different ways. Uh, if you think you're doing it, it's probably an illusion, honestly. You probably just can't help it. We all have stories, don't we? We all have the tales we like to tell, the stories. We've talked about these reels before in previous meetings, right? One reel ends, and the amazing thing about our reels, or our roles, if you wish, is that there's a little code at the end of one that immediately goes and gathers the next one, right? And so you'll see people, they'll sit there and they'll get into a conversation, and the one fellow will be like, ah, yes, this one time I was fishing and and he goes through his story, which someone's heard before, right? I've heard this before. I know, but let me finish, right? That's the key right there, because it's going to finish whether you like it or not. If someone says, you've told me this 1,000 times, and maybe you should just go, you're right, and stop and feel how difficult that is, because your brain life is going to want to continue the story. It's going to want to finish it. Even though you acknowledge that that person has heard it before, it's going to still want to finish the story because it started it. You see how difficult brains can be. Yeah. And once it's done with that one, there's a little code at the end that's going to go right into the next one because it relates to that one. And a code at the end of that one that's going to want to go to this one. And my God, will you ever just shut up? We don't. Yeah? This is what our brains are like, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So it does take some discipline. You're absolutely right, Knight. Yeah, but as a general starting place, just be in command of it. Don't do this. Yeah, let it know, because it thinks it's in charge, but it's not capable of running the show. Trust me.
Yes.
Your brain is in the least capable. You know what? It's actually more powerful than you in many respects, but it's a tyrant unless it's your servant. Yeah. Take an organization, for example. Let's say that you have an engineering firm and you have a CEO, okay, that is not an engineer. He's just there to make sure that the show runs properly, that the company runs properly. He hires engineers that are much smarter than he is to be able to do things like engineer, software engineers, hardware engineers, whatever the case is, right? They engineer things. That's their job. If they were to get into a mathematical or physics or electronics or software design debate with the CEO would lose because he doesn't know engineering. He's there to run the show. That's kind of what your brain is like. Your brain is very, very powerful at the things that it does, but unfortunately, it also thinks it's the CEO because you've never stepped into the shoes. You've never stepped into the role and said, no, this is what I need you to go do, brain. And so it just goes, oh, I'm going to drag you over here and I'm going to drag you over there and I'm going to make you show me this and make you talk about that. And yeah, it's out of balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ah, good. All right. Any other mysteries out there? We've had 7 weeks together since we started. Plus a couple of years for some of you, but
One more, but I don't want to monopolize.
yeah,
NZ?
go. It's okay.
Sure.
Oh yeah, sure. NZ, anybody.
My favorite topic of the moment, the astral body. I'm beginning to understand. Maybe, and it's only maybe, Pierce. I I don't profess to be an expert on this. Maybe why it was never discussed in the Eminent as a target or a goal or something.
Mhm.
Is it because it's possible to crystallize an astral body and make a mistake.
Yeah, absolutely. And then
Okay.
what happens is you have to come back in another life and melt it all down, and it's so much worse. You spend an entire life melting it down, and if you're lucky, you might have corrected the mistakes that you need to, and then you can begin to work on yourself. So yeah, don't
Crikey.
crystallize wrongly.
Okay, crikey, that is quite a warning, isn't it?
I won't say you're better off. Yeah, actually, I will say that. I will say that you're better off not ever having an astral body than developing a malformed one.
Okay.
Hmm?
Now,
I'll even go a little bit further that if you don't end up, if you crystallize incorrectly your astral body, if you crystallize incorrectly, you may not have the option of coming back as a human. Right? You might have to come back as a dog or a fly or something else. But I'll say this: that imagine how uncomfortable that is. That's like trying to put a glove on that only has 3 fingers and you have 5, and you have to jam it on somehow, however you can, just to survive. Mm, yeah, and
and
then you don't
presumably
have
that
a
is a
chance. So yeah, so it's risky business, isn't it?
presumably that is a one-way street, Pierce.
It is a one-way street. It's a last-ditch effort to survive, but your possibility for continuance is pretty much over at that point.
Yeah. And so that raises the question then, that because in fourth way work they say an astral body is indispensable. What's missing from the Eminent studies on this then? I mean, I, I can't stop thinking that they were thinking there's some other way forward, i.e., straight to a mental body or straight to an emotional body.
You just can't do that.
Right, right.
No, the path forward is get the lower centers in order, develop an astral body that is befitting to a human being, and then go on to the rest of it. The mental body. Actually, the mental body begins to show up first. It's not really relevant to this, but yeah, there is an order of operations. I think it is a mistake, however, to look at that as a goal. It's not that the fourth way says that the astral body is indispensable. It is from the standpoint of what you can do with it. Okay, what you can do with it in the higher realms. But it's not like you have these organizations like the Monroe Institute and these sorts of things that just teach people how to supposedly astral travel. Um, and sometimes it's a mixture of just depleting their etheric energy, and sometimes it's just sheer imagination. But that's the goal. And for us, the goal isn't to develop an astral body. It's used as a tool to be able to develop our spirituality.
Okay.
Mhm. Whereas in other places, it's just like, hey, you know, get an astral body, see the world, right? Navy, Navy reference or something. Yeah.
This raises astonishing questions for me,
Hmm.
because of all the people that have been through the Emin, how many of them are conscious of um, this development possibility? How
Well, I'll
many?
take it one step further and tell you that of all the people that have been through the Emin, I would guess maybe 5 to 10 developed an astral body. It's not as easy as you might think, or it's not as easy as pandered around out there.
Mm,
Yeah. There's no question. If you have one, you have one, because you can literally separate and stand beside yourself and watch yourself have this conversation. It's not like an imagination.
okay. So, as once was said in the Emin, I can't remember who said it now and when, but something like people are going to be dying in the Emin as they get older, thinking that they've made it.
Yeah, true.
I'm you know, it's an astonishing proposition, really. There's just one other line of thinking that comes into my mind, and I don't know whether we can answer it tonight or leave it for another week or something. But in the Emin, they made a lot of the onsetting new era.
Mm.
could it be that the rules of the game are going to change?
No, here's a misunderstanding in that regard. Epochs are like seeds. Okay, now you plant a cherry tree, okay, and an epoch happens. It begins to sprout, it begins to become a cherry tree, it blossoms, it produces fruit, it drops a cherry. The cherry, if it's lucky, enters the soil and begins an epoch. None of those cherry trees violate the laws that have been in existence since the dawn of creation. But that cherry tree has the possibility of moving somewhere else, right? Of being next to the original cherry tree, of having a different set of exposures, of being part of a forest of cherry trees, if you follow the analogy. Well, every analogy only goes so far, but you understand it still is what it is. That's what epochs are.
Yes.
The onsetting now from a human standpoint, when the planet goes through an epoch and it plants a new cherry tree, it seems very different. But I'll tell you, it's not from a creational standpoint. The rules don't change, just the circumstances. Now, what it can mean for a particular life is that, if you've got a fella or a lady that has been reincarnating or stuck, I should say, stuck in a cycle of recurrence, for example, it may give them a new lease on life to be able to get out of that. Right? I mean, think about it. If you've been in the same life a million times over, because you're just not in the right place, a new epoch, a new cherry tree, you might be somewhere else and have a better opportunity to do so. Does that help?
I think so. I can't think how that would work, but
You what?
I I cannot think how that would work because in eternal recurrence,
Mm-hmm.
how is that dependent on epochs?
Mm. Well, it is a organic way to escape the epoch.
Okay.
Meaning, well, first of all, let's clear up something about recurrence. It's not necessarily, me born in 1972, die at some future point in time, and then right back into 1972. There is actually the possibility, and it happens quite frequently, that I become my grandfather. Yeah. And then I become the grandson, and then I become my great grandfather. Is this kind of, you can recur through multiple lives, but within a certain family tree and in a certain family time frame in there. All right. This raises a very funny question, which will challenge your notion of time. And that is that you can meet yourself in a different form. Mm. In other words, if you are your grandfather and you are also your grandson, you look into each other's eyes and you get to meet yourself in another form. It's still you. It's still you. It's chilling, actually, to think about it, but it's still you. It's just you looking at you in a different form. But you can still be trapped in a loop. You can still be trapped in a cycle. Yeah. Now that's advanced stuff, right? How does that sit?
So is that saying that your personality can be, or your essence can be in two places?
Yeah, simultaneously, because time doesn't work the way you think it does linearly. It doesn't work like that.
Okay.
It's loops within loops within loops, really. That's how God in creation made sure that it could actually stand. Yeah, because otherwise it would just all drain out. Right? How does it go? God found himself in diminishment through the aspect of time and rolled out the red carpet of the ray of creation. That's what the ray of creation is. That 1428571 is reciprocating back in. So in other words, grandfather, grandson, great grandchild, or son, or whatever the case is, can be 142, but all part of the same dynamic. Whoa. Something to think
This, I
about.
think, is something that would be good to go into.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, as long as we can keep it out of the realms of theory and into the
Yeah.
realms of, can you actually get to the point in your own consciousness where you can experience such a thing? Because otherwise, this might as well be Urantia or whatever, doesn't even matter at
Yeah,
that point.
sure. Yeah.
Right? Scientology or something, right?
Mhm.
So that would be the condition that I would say, yes, let's go into this further, is let's get to the point where you can actually see it for yourself and experience it, not just go, wow, what a concept. Does that sound reasonable?
Yes, it
Absolutely.
does.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Opens up all kinds of things though. If nothing else, there's a bit of inspiration I can see across some of your faces. Because it has that frequency to it anyway. All right, what else? We're about there, a little over, doesn't matter.
Come on, Mrs. You've been quiet for an hour and a half.
Oh, there's so much in there. Yeah.
Okay, fair enough. We have more time together, all right? This isn't like the last conversation, but next week we're going to go into some of the cosmology of things and some of what came and showed up today to do with things like reincarnation, recurrence, how the universe works, and so on and so forth. Will begin to make more sense from a laws perspective, from a perspective that you can actually do something with it, right? What's my one piece of advice for everyone? Do what you know. Be in a position to do what you know. If you can't, then you don't know it. And you need to go learn it and actually get to the point where you can do it, right? Do what you know.
It comes back to that thing I was saying about questions. That if you don't
this
ask
is a safe
enough
place to ask questions. It really is, right? I'm not going to give you all the answers, but I'm going to at least, as best I can, steer in the right direction.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, Pierce.
Thank you.
Real quick here, I'm going to stop recording. And